Okay. Any concern?
Liam, how are we online?
No one's in attendance.
Are we live though?
Oh, we are. I believe
Okay,
we are.
so we're live there. We're live. So we are now
That's because
live.
Allison's here.
Allison, your flashlight is on as well.
Oh,
I love it. I love it. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is Scarborough Town Council Workshop of Wednesday, June 15th. And we're here to review the charter recommendations. I'm going to call this meeting to order and note that we have Councilor Hamel. Perfect. Councilor Katarina, myself, Councilor Anderson, and Councilor Seither in attendance. And I've invited Councilor-elect Nick McGee to join us at the table, which is particularly fitting because he was actually chair of the charter committee that brought forward the recommendations we'll be talking about today. With that, I've asked Councilor Katarina to coordinate the charter review process, and this is our second workshop, and I'm going to toss it over to her to help guide us through.
Okay, thank you, everybody. The way we're gonna go through this is we'll take each one of the recommendations that came from the charter committee and basically find out right off the top. People even want to discuss it, because if they don't, fine, great, next one, we'll go to the next one. But the point is to make some discussions, do some straw polling about where we think it's gonna go. The big thing is that we need to have this finished and out in order to be on the ballot by when? I'm looking at Tony.
It would be the first Wednesday in September,
So that we should have it all voted out by the end of that meeting.
or if not before.
If not before, exactly. So, you know, we may only have 2 meetings, one in July, one in August, I don't know, but, so we gotta get on this. Anyway, just for the public, we created the ad hoc committee on October 7th, 2020. They were selected, the members of November 2020. We started meeting in January of 2021. So this has been out there a bit. There were a number of people from the community who were on this committee, and I thank them very much for all of the work that they did, because it's not easy to go through charter. And not only you go through the charter, you've got to make decisions on what's going to be moved forward to the council. And we didn't always agree on things, but I felt as the liaison that, you know, the conversations were helpful, and it was well done. So thank you, Mr. McGee, for chairing that. It's not an easy thing to chair. So without any further ado, did you folks see the letter from Phil Saucier by chance briefly? Because I'm going to be referring to that when we're talking. William's gonna be filling in for me because Jean Marie's mind's a little fuzzy today after being at polls all day yesterday. So let's start. Liam, can you bring up the slides, please? So we're gonna start right off with Article 2, Section 201. So what we have here in black, the black is the exact quotation from the charter, and the red is either an addition or a change or whatever from the committee. So they're obviously talking about the composition, 7 members, terms of 3 years. So what was added by the Charter Commission was following the effective date, the following elected appointed officials shall serve for no more than 3 years of consecutive, and they made it was us, so that didn't really change anything. The members of the Board of Education, which didn't change anything, but then I think it was full voting members and zoning board of appeals or sanitary district trustees. Liam, I'm leaning on you.
Yep, that's okay. So this was a formatting change. So this really, it moved, these term limits
Okay,
were already
that's right.
codified in 806, and the committee proposed to move this to section 201.
Okay.
So no substantive change.
No
really just
substantive
formatting.
change,
Yep.
it's really just a formatting
Yep.
thing. Does that formatting have to go to the voters? Ministerial changes like that?
I don't know definitively the answer to that.
That's a good question.
In speaking with Phil, I think it's
Yeah.
what recommendations the council brings forward. He can decide what
Oh,
goes
good,
together
okay,
and what
all right,
doesn't.
okay,
It's
cool.
after the council
Okay,
does their work.
okay, good.
I believe that he had some comments as well. It
Yes,
just
and I
shows-
was just gonna
Okay.
refer to that. And so Phil does say regarding this section, section 201, and then 806 is that relocation from where it's relocated. He does say that proposed language moves existing terms, limit language. I'm skipping just some things. The existing language in section 806 works fine to accomplish this objective. If the council chooses to move this language, these are his recommendations. First is Article 2, thus section 201 only relates to the town council. So the term limits proposal should likewise only be limited to the town council in this section. Term limits for the planning board and zoning board would likely instead fall within a new subsection. I love the legal stuff here. 204.1.2 related to council appointments, and the Board of Education would be under their section, which is section 401 and 402. And this is the important one. The town does not have the authority to enact term limits on the sanitary district. Sanitary district is a quasi municipal body, so that's his legal opinion on that. So any thoughts on this particular section? And again, this was more to make things a little more consistent during the charter. And Jonathan had his hand up first.
Yeah, it seems after reading Phil's stuff, I'm like, is it easier just to keep it where it was and just keep it that way? I understand the intent was to kind of move it there, but because of that, it just seems like it might be easier to keep it. But the only question I would have, understanding we now maybe have to strike sanitary district trustees based on his guidance. We have the planning board and the zoning board. Why didn't the committee suggest, or maybe they did, the long range planning committee as also another committee that had term limits?
My recollection is the bodies mentioned here have a more than an advisory role. They actually has a decision-making, a quasi judicial
Yeah.
role. And I think in law statute, they're recognized differently than an advisory board such as
Okay,
That's it.
long range planning.
Just from recollection, I think we did discuss it and I think it failed on a 4-4 vote
okay.
about putting it in with the term limit.
Mhm.
And I think, I'm pretty sure the attorney would have been like.
Correct. Right.
I don't think so. So.
Okay.
just so- John?
I second that. I think keeping it in 806 is probably the simplest thing, as opposed to trying to identify term limits each place that the groups are referenced. And good question about long range planning.
I mean, I would go along with keeping it in 806. Dawn? what do you
I'm fine with
think?
that.
Because there's really no substantive change. As I recall, Nick, and this was really to bring it all into one place. So you didn't have to hunt and search all around and have it in 4 different places. But the substance really didn't change. The 3 consecutive terms was consistent throughout. It just existed in 3 or 4 different places.
Didn't it only exist in 806? And now we're putting it in 3 or 4, or
We're
Yeah.
moving it.
We're moving it.
we would remove it from 806. The proposal is to put it in Article 2.
Fair point, yes.
Yes.
So just without taking a vote, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to ask a clarifying question because I didn't get a chance to read Phil's letter thoroughly. So he has indicated that this is something that would have to be standalone. Or no?
The proposal to move it to Article 2, Article 2 only relates to the town council. So
Right.
whatever is in Article 2 should be germane to the town council.
Okay,
Then you would also have to put it, I don't know what the article is, but where the Board of Education is referenced
4,
and where the
another
planning
4.
board is.
okay.
is
So the
referenced.
reason I ask is I'm trying to wrap my head around what the impact of our decisions are for a referendum. And so with keeping that as, I think, the main reason why we would maybe just leave it by the sounds of it, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that the reason for leaving it primarily is because it would have to go to referendum as a standalone item, and
It may have to be
4 times.
four
four
times. Okay.
different ballot
I know.
questions, which makes, maybe further complicates things.
Mhm.
Okay,
Which was why I asked the question to Tony about what I see as ministerial
Right.
being, where it needed to go.
Okay.
Yeah, if Phil's changes are, don't change the force and effect of what's already in place, I'd say would be that, and don't move it.
All right. So that's the straw poll. And, Kim, I'm sorry. Bear with me. It's like you leave it. So, all right. Next, what's next? God, I'm not used to wearing two different glasses here, sorry. Article 2, compensation. Obviously, it's changing compensation, it's increasing it to 2,500 and then increasing the chair. And I would also say that they are also, didn't they have it for the
406.
education
Yep.
for the 406?
Some more change.
So there was some mixed feeling. It was very interesting. The public members of the committee were like, oh, sure, Those of us who were elected were like, well, maybe it should wait till we're out of office type of thing, just because of the political ramifications. But with that being said, I'd love to hear any thoughts, feedback. Go ahead, John.
I'm just curious, can you guys talk about how the 2,500 was identified? Like, what was the rationale behind that suggestion?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it was a compromise. I think you had members that really thought the pay should have been more, like
Yeah.
significantly more for the amount of hours.
Of course, I'm going, sure.
But I think there was a general sentiment that there needed to be an acknowledgement of times have changed. This 10 years ago was the last time this number was adjusted. So
Mhm.
I think what you're looking at is a compromise figure.
Do we,
And I think I'm remembering too, and I'm looking at Nick, that it came up that when it was the 1,500, it sort of offset property taxes for people at that time. And that was part of the thinking of that number.
mm.
So there you go.
Do other towns pay their
Oh,
counselors
God.
and school board?
Every town's
that-
different. They're all
Yeah.
different. Portland just went up. They're like 15,000
Wow.
a year. But yet you can go to Gorham and Gorham is minimal, isn't it? Like 500 or something. So they're all different.
Some elected bodies go so far as to provide benefits to their elected officials as well, with some
That was a big
level of controversy.
Yeah.
insurance. Yeah, that was huge
Mhm.
controversy.
Free beach passes.
Little perks.
We used to
Parking
get
spaces.
Beechridge Speedway
Ooh,
passes. What are
counselor
you
parking
talking about?
Yeah. At the beach, yeah.
Of different towns?
I did a spreadsheet.
Oh, that's
Oh, you
right.
did?
You want to share?
And I took, I think, the top 15 cities / towns. So Portland was 5,700 a year.
Oh, yeah, they just were.
Lewiston,
increased it.
2,700, Bangor 2, South Portland 3, Auburn 18, Bedford 1,200, Scarborough's 1,500, Sanford 650 annual town meeting, Brunswick 4,000, Saco 1,200. I don't think I must look at it right. Augusta 2,400. Wyndham was an approved budget allocation on $10 a meeting or $300 a year.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, and it's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's all over the place.
1,500.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would-
Um,
I would just say for me personally, I'm ambivalent to this one. It could stay the same, it could go up. I'm fine either way.
It would not be inappropriate if you have discomfort around having it apply to this
Right.
currently seated elected officials. We could add additional language that would be clear as to when that takes effect, that it would
like 2025.
not take effect after the
It's a good idea.
term of the longest term of the existing,
Right.
we can come up with language.
I think it should go up. I think that we have the opportunity to revise the charter, every 10 years. Like, this will be so far outdated if we don't take advantage of doing something about it now. And so I definitely think that it should go up. And then the discussion of whether the chair should get a little bit additional, I'm also in support of. the chair does a lot. So I think that even if it's just a fancy dinner out with their spouse or a night in a hotel somewhere, I think that that's a nice gesture.
I kind of line up with that, and a slightly different twist though, is I'm, looking at this increase would make us, I think, a little more competitive with what's being done in other places. And I think that, I don't know how much this would generate a broader pool of candidates to run, but people tend to be motivated by their own, their own expectations, whether that's a reward or a punishment for serving. But so I'm in favor of this, but going into effect, in the future, not currently.
Reggie.
Do you want to go first, Nick? Go.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say that, I appreciate that you're all a little uneasy about voting your own salaries, although think you should take a little bit of peace of mind that this actually came from the public.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So there's a whole committee of assortment of different types of people with backgrounds that said you probably deserve a raise. So just take that for what it's worth.
No, and you're right. Go ahead.
So yes, I am reluctant to give myself a raise, to vote myself a raise, but I'm reading at the language that was struck in at the end, where it looked like the existing charter named an amount, but actually gave the authority to the council to change it, as long as they don't change it on themselves. How come we're taking that piece out and just locking in a number in the charter?
My recollection is no such ordinance exists, first off, and I think it was kind of a compromise to say, let the voters decide, and we'll not choose to reserve the right to do it outside of the voters process. So I think that was kind of the compromise.
Because no council will ever want to pass something that raises or appears to raise.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
Politically. Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, I'm happy to increase compensation for folks, but I also felt it should be after the term of, the latest term, which I think would be 2025, but whatever.
I think it's a
So-
good idea.
Is it
So we-
2025? Who's up?
2024.
I'm
Yeah.
2023, you guys are 2024.
That's
so
the last one.
Be
Yeah.
You would have
2024.
the last one.
So this could go into effect,
2025.
yeah.
Was what
January
I was
2025.
thinking.
Yeah.
So if that's your pleasure, we can come up with language
Yeah,
that
that'd
would
be
actually
good.
be inserted here and be part of the question that goes to the voters.
And do we want to, so we don't have to talk about it again, the school board also?
Yep.
Yeah, let's do that with the school board.
So that's section 406, just if you're paying attention.
All right. Rules, the next one is 212 Rules of Procedure Journal. And this was talking about, we'll determine our own rules in order of business. Then it added appointed elected ad hoc committees and boards to keeping a written record of proceedings and whenever possible broadcasts, etc. Phil had something to say about this. This section is in Article 2, which only relates to the town council. If the intent is to require all boards and committees of the town to keep written records, it could be worded as follows, quote, the council and any boards and comments, I think he meant committees there, appointed by the council shall keep a written record, end quote. And then he said you could also insert that same provision in section 404. And Mr. Ken was like, no. By the way, he was no on compensation too, but I
He didn't
brought him
want them
around
to be-
after I talked to him.
He didn't want them to be obligated to maintain written
Right,
records.
he said, don't make any changes.
I think FOIA requires it anyways, right?
Right,
Is there-
that way I think that was his thing.
Your chapter 302A, which is the boards and committees manual, imposes these requirements. This would obviously strengthen it by adding it to the charter.
Any thoughts?
I mean, I thought it was fine. Like I would support this if it were to go forward. I understand it's in 302A, but I think just to, demonstrate a commitment to transparency, this is just something that we can memorialize in the charter. So again, I think it's fine. I would vote in favor of this if we were to vote for this.
Subject to some final wordsmithing.
Yeah.
Yeah, subject to the.
Or, yeah, I don't know if it needs to move to 404.
April's thinking, I can
It would
see
be
she's
duplicated
thinking.
Okay,
For the board.
it would be,
away.
okay.
Yeah, it's not that I have opposition to it being in the charter, I guess. It's more just if it's redundant. It's, we're trying to play this, in some places, we're trying to remove redundancies, and then in other places, we're kind of saying we're intentionally being redundant. And so for me, I feel like if part of our looking at the charter is to streamline some pieces, then I don't think that we should put something in the charter that's statutorily required by the state or federal government for that
John, go
matter.
ahead. And can you hold your thought for one second?
Yeah.
Tom, real quick.
Mhm.
Under that state statute requirement, do they require broadcasting and recording? Because that was the discussion.
No, no, it's really proper notice and some record of the proceedings, if you will.
Okay. John, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm in favor of this because I think that it's just new technology. I think it does help us to engage the public more effectively. Not everybody's going to go hunt online for a written record, but if they can click on YouTube, it's a lot easier, much more accessible. So, I'm in favor of this, and I don't think it's an unreasonable burden administratively. So.
Yes, I can get on board, specifically when it comes to recording. Sure.
That's why I asked that
Yep.
question.
Yep,
Because
great
as I'm
question.
thinking about it, I'm like, wait, I
Yep.
think that was. missing-
That
what
makes-
was missing out of
That
this
makes
bid.
much more sense to me.
From an administrative point of view, the only way we can effectively record consistently, and just appreciate you all know as well as I do, we have dozens of committees that would fall under this requirement. Shellfish in coastal waters. Right now, that's not occurring.
Yep.
So the only way we would do that is through the hybrid approach, using Zoom or some related technology. We simply don't have the resources to have Peter and his staff physically at these meetings. They're often at different locations that don't have the capabilities for audio and
Will
video.
the owl work?
It will. So I think, all of a sudden we have this new technology that affords this, but even so, we still have committees that aren't doing this. So there's a further effort to be made here.
That was going to be my question was, one, do we have any committees that don't produce a written record of their meetings today?
I think, to the best of my knowledge, that what committees we have in place, there's a written record.
Okay, but they're not all recorded.
Correct.
Even post Zoom world,
Right.
there's still
Correct.
some that aren't.
The rec advisory board we haven't been recording.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Transportation, I'm not sure if they do sustainability,
Yeah.
do they?
Transportation, we started to, I think, because all the
With
committees
Zoom, they started.
adopted the
doing
policy, I
stuff,
think, right?
so.
I guess go ahead, Nick.
It is the actual reason for the first two words, whenever possible,
Yeah.
because the committee had extensive discussion about it, that we needed to allow for some wiggle room based on logistics.
Yeah. that makes sense.
So it wasn't going to be a hard and fast rule, but whenever possible, we'd like to have the recordings. And that was kind of our mechanism to give the flexibility to the town.
So we took a step in this direction with revising 302A, I think it is, maybe a year or two ago. And I think we required it for any committee that was formed through the charter. We require the recording. I guess my tendency would be, why don't we start with a policy or charter and see what complications there, not charter, a policy or ordinance, and see what complications might come up before putting it in the charter.
It's up there right now. That's 302A. So that's what we amended back in October of 21.
Yeah, I remember that now.
So we could broaden this. But then because once the charter's there, the charter's there, right? I wouldn't mind test driving it a little bit.
So are you saying don't put it in the charter?
I'm reluctant to put it in the
Okay.
charter, given that we haven't tried it everywhere.
302A is probably 5 or 6 years old. As you can look to the top to see where it was first enacted, but we've come light years. And this document itself really forced committees to regularize their operations, and it forced me to really ensure as best I could to have staff support to help assist these committees to make sure agendas are produced and notices provided and agendas are followed, so on and so forth, and minutes are kept. So this didn't, yeah, I guess it was 2012, time flies.
Ken's got in here, it's covered elsewhere, so what, no, he was like, he did the support change. So,
I think I would agree with what Counselor Clucci said now of like, let's test pilot it. Because
Yeah.
again, even the term whenever possible that Nick pointed out to me is like, makes it vague and unenforceable. So I would say if the intent is really to try and, get more recordings, I would agree, like, let's work through 302A
Yeah.
and see if we want to add more and keep it going. Because I think most, at least today, right? I think most are recording.
right,
And that was by choice, right? Because after COVID, we had each committee vote on what they wanted to do. And at least everybody did vote to do it. I don't know if everybody is actually doing it. But I think the intent was everybody felt like it was important in this new technology world to be able to record. So I don't think it would be an issue. It might be for some committees that meet off the beaten path or don't have the technology locally where they meet. Because we were meeting at the hub, and I don't know if Todd has his own owl at the hub that he
Make
can
those
use.
arrangements. There are other committees, the members, for whatever reason, choose or are uncomfortable sometimes with that. Not sure if that's your choice, but I think that has certainly weighed into some of that decision-making over time. They feel like they can have more candid and frank discussion without that.
Mhm.
I personally feel like, I mean, I know I've heard it from all sides now, from your charter, and then here that I would just assume, let's do it the way we are through rules.
Yep.
And-
Slowly expanded that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm back to where I started. This feels like a policy to me. And so it's required statutorily,
Right,
but the nitty gritty details of it to me belong in our ordinances
Yeah.
and policies.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's just a good question to be asking as we look through this of, does it need to be in the charter or could it be in an ordinance or policy? Because I wasn't thinking that, but this is a good example of
right.
asking those three questions. It
Yeah.
really feels like a policy.
Mhm.
Can I just offer a few comments? I think that where this has gotten a bit conflated was the committees were asked to adopt remote participation policies. And what made that possible was the technology, which by effect essentially provided a video recording of the proceeding. I think that in other conversations through rules and policies, we've really tried to be cognizant to what should go in 302, which speaks to council rules and procedures, and 302A, which are town committees, town appointed committees. And so I think it's really important that we maintain that distinction, because I think we started going down a path where we were trying to bind town appointed committees through changes in 302 that weren't reflected in 302A. And so I think right now we have a pretty good delineation between 302 is town council rules and town council committees, i.e. finance, ordinance, rules and policies. And then 302A is really all of those appointed committees, including planning board, long range planning, et cetera, and other advisory committees. So just to echo, I think Councillor Seither's point, I think and this is really, I think Phil's word of caution here, is that we don't want to tie in something that's really a town council section of the charter to bind town council appointed committees. I think that's muddying the waters. And so I think that there's I think that that's something that we just need to be cognizant to. It's been all tied together because of those competing things that kind of touch on a lot of those areas.
So we want to, at least at the moment, say, yeah, we're probably not interested in moving forward. Next, section 213, public hearings on ordinances. It changes the time from 7 to 14 days for advanced publication. And then adds as well as on town's website. So it extends public notice of hearings and updating posting requirements. Go on.
So I have a question. So in that sense where it says, as well as the town's website and by posting notice in a public place, Does that mean it's a public notice in the paper, or it just means you have it on a bulletin board someplace?
It depends. Statute will dictate where that public notice needs to be provided.
Okay.
So it depends on the nature of the public hearing or the public notice.
So any hearings that go before the council, that's published in the paper.
Yeah.
There are some notices that the planning board posts in-house if it's not required to be posted in the newspaper.
So the big change is here, a longer, doubling the number of days of advance notice required and putting it on the town's website. Those two things.
Yeah, and that doubling doesn't seem like much, but the way the calendar falls, that will certainly result in delay sometimes of when matters are heard. I can't predict exactly when, and it'll just depend on how something's kind of moving through the system and when the bodies are scheduled to meet. But we'll fall into that cadence, quite quickly, I suppose.
Where did the 14 come from? What's the rationale behind changing it? Is just to give increased notice, or are there other towns that are doing it, or is there a state statute that's changing that might require it?
Just, I think just in general, the committee felt a little bit more time would have been nice.
The state statute is 7 days today.
It can be 10 day. It really depends on the nature of the item.
Exactly. Like our marijuana ordinance, we have to post that 10 days before. I think downstairs in planning, some of it's 10, some of it's a little, they may have to post notices
So
twice.
we would view this unless otherwise prescribed by state law or local ordinance. 14 days would be the prevailing notice requirement.
That's where I was going to go. We probably need to give deference to state law. Or if there's other things that locally we want to, I think we can always be more restrictive. We can always add to it, but this is setting the minimum, right?
So some of these ordinances, I don't know what the general trend is, but some of the ordinances are big, right? They're voluminous, and the complexity, I think we could probably agree that the number and the complexity of ordinances that we're passing is also getting more complicated. So for me, it seems reasonable to allow more time. But I do get the point about it's not just 2 weeks. It could be longer depending upon where.
Yeah.
Well, in that, you gotta remember, okay, so you put out the notice, and then you've got one hearing, then you get public hearing, you get another hearing.
Right.
I mean, and you're working it through ordinance, and then it's going to council, and
Yeah.
it makes it out of ordinance, so it's not like there's not all sorts of opportunity for public.
Yeah.
Input knowledge. Ken, by the way, has no.
The other thing we've done kind of along these lines, I'm thinking in the licensing category for special amusement licenses, we now have butter notices that we provide, which was not previously. That's certainly one of the reasons that you're getting input on these matters. So I think in the same vein, we're trying to make people aware of the council's business and things that might be of interest to them. This, in my view, this would also require us to create a portal or some landing spot on our website where all these notices would reside. It would still require someone to seek that out and see it.
I think that's a good idea.
I think I was gonna say.
Yeah, that's
I think we should have that anyway, probably.
And I think we do, right? Aren't we posting
I
this?
try to get them out on the public notices. I didn't this time, but
It's new.
Can I just go back to what someone said about whether it's a policy or an
Yeah.
ordinance? I mean, it could be a policy or an ordinance instead of a charter.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking back, we rescheduled our first meeting in June, right? And we had already given public notices for Comfort Inn and other things. We had to redo those public notices. But if we were bound by this 14 days, we would not be holding that meeting until today. So practically, there's some
Yeah,
limitations, even though those notices had already been delivered, just because we changed the date of the meeting.
I like Cody's recommendation. Is there a place, like which policy would we update if we were to categorize different types of ordinances to say, it sounds like there's some today that are state driven, right? That we have to do in certain
Right.
timeframes.
Right.
I don't really have an understanding of what all those are to be able to know, do those feel like the appropriate amount of time, or would more time be better for the public?
The end of 302 has a matrix, I think.
Does it for all
That
those?
might be the right place. I don't know if you can bring that up. I always get confused 302 versus 302A, but
Who's that?
302 is the council, so.
I
that's-
know.
I think it's 302, Liam, not A.
Oh, this is better.
I can't see it.
So this doesn't list the notice requirement, does it?
What's the footnotes down below?
Where exception, second reading be held on the same night.
Maybe this is someplace we could add it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe in many cases, the state law does dictate, and it's probably further supported by local ordinance. I'm thinking of the licensure process has a public hearing requirement. As was mentioned earlier, the marijuana licensing, again, that's licensing that has its own prescribed timeframe. I think this does stand to maybe complicate things. What is the default? What is the timeframe that we need to be respecting here when it's prescribed otherwise differently elsewhere?
That's what I was gonna, maybe we should defer to state law as required, because state law is gonna change. Or local or other ordinances. Maybe the
Or-
7's problematic too.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I was gonna say, personally, I don't see a need for doing this, given everything I'm hearing, and I think it can go out of policies. Making changes or working on it here is more appropriate than charter.
Or leave it the way it is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, just leave it.
At least 7 is what we've been living with.
Right,
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the spirit of why,
Right.
we always want the public, and especially if we have committee members doing this work saying, well, we don't feel like we get enough public notice. That's something that we should all hear. But I'm not sure that, mandating 14 days is necessarily always appropriate.
right.
Is a public place, the definition of that, does that include websites? Because that implied in that,
Definition.
again, I-
interpret the website to be a public place.
That's what I would assume,
Accessible at the public's convenience, whenever
Mhm.
they wish. It's probably more public. It's
Yeah.
Well, some people do.
That's not true.
Some people do.
Survey said.
Tom has one every morning.
arguably, it's probably more public than posting it on the bulletin board here
Right.
that's only accessible during
Yeah.
working hours. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
So are people feeling like, okay, move on from this one? Okay. Next one. Oh, town clerk. Town clerk shall be appointed, et cetera. And it says, keep a public record of all proceedings of town council, then the changes, including appointed, elected ad hoc committees and boards. It goes back to including all roll call votes, and then adds again, and other duties as assigned by administrative code and by law. Sean,
So I had a couple of concerns with this one. The way I read the original charter, all of our town committees are a byproduct of the town council. They're all formed by the council and set up to advise, aside from other ones that are created through the charter. And the other piece that I didn't like was referring to, it's essentially deferring to ordinance anyways. So it's saying, reference the administrative code, which is one of our ordinances. To me, I don't like having your charter is your master document, and it should be high level. It shouldn't defer to, I guess, a lesser document for guidance. That can always happen anyways. Maybe I should have asked the town clerk first.
oh, I was gonna do that. I was gonna defer to the, all right, we'll all defer to the town clerk.
Well, whenever the council forms a committee, in that charge, there's a requirement that they have to keep records of that meeting. Also in the, I'm just bringing up the town clerk in the administrative code is the record keeper. So I'm already doing what this is.
So this is redundant to you, okay? I would
Because when
say,
we form the committee, there's a charge, the part of that charge is they have to make a record of that meeting. And the administrative code already has a records in it, a records department in there, which requires me to maintain records. So,
They have to give it to you. You have to keep it on file.
Yes. So I'm good with next. For April's,
Yeah, no, I guess unless there's a rationale that we're missing.
right. I don't think there is. Dawn?
Yeah,
Then I'll
I don't
put
hear
Hoya
one.
over there.
I don't hear one.
Okay, cool. All right, next. Next, we already basically talked about, you guys okay with the, just applying the compensation thing to the board of BOE?
Yep.
Okay, next one, Article 5 budget. 502 1.1, exact statement of financial conditions of the town is all it says right now. So now that has been added, which will include an assessment of the condition of the fiscal assets owned, operated, managed, or otherwise utilized by the town, and the ability of those physical assets to meet current and future requirements of the town, consistent with generally accepted accounting and audit standards. Feedback.
Yeah, I like this one. I mean, it's a balance sheet thing. It does stipulate, details in terms of, which physical, it's not just the, the budget and the revenues, it's the assets of the town. And I think we've talked about the need perhaps at some time sooner rather than later to do a strategic plan that would involve us, trying to make decisions about other things that might be added to that list. So I'm in favor of this. And I don't think we have a clear requirement for doing it now.
Anyone else have a?
I don't know what it means. So I think the exact statement of the town is maybe not specific, but I think we're getting it. I think it's being produced today. When we get into assessment of the condition of the physical assets owned, operated, managed, or otherwise utilized, well, under what basis are we making that assessment? And because I don't think there are generally accepted accounting or auditing standards to do. I mean, in our annual statement, there are some pieces that do cover that.
Okay.
Well, the new GASB standards do require us to record and report our fixed assets. So we have a list. And then depreciation is applied to that list for purposes of coming up with our kind of balance sheet, if you will. This goes quite a bit further to talk about an assessment of the condition of those physical assets. And remember, this is all couched within, this would be contained within the budget. And I'm a little uncertain as to how to approach this and what that would look like in the context of the budget.
I can take a stab at it. I mean, I can see the superintendent or Tom saying the condition of these assets is not satisfactory, so we need to replace them.
What's that
Given
mean?
the
Yeah.
political, I don't know, I feel like it adds a layer of politics to it that maybe doesn't need to be there.
So the thought that I had on it, responding to your point, is that would we have this otherwise? So think about the sort of issues we're dealing with now in terms of modulars and condition of primary schools and that sort of thing. Would those things arise anyway without a requirement like this? And if so, is there anything standardized about that? And the latter part of it, I don't think there is anything standardized about it at all.
Do we, so Tom, like you said, we have some sort of documentation somewhere of all of our capital assets and.
But it's really just kind of overview. It
Yeah.
describes the asset generally, provides a value to that, and then there's a depreciation factor applied.
And then the school does the same thing that you know of?
I believe they are included on that list, yes.
I
They
just
have to do
wonder,
something for the DOE.
yeah,
And I don't know what the frequency is, but they do have, I think it's every 3 years. I don't know if they do. I haven't actually seen it, but I know that there's some DOE rules that
mhm,
require it.
Everyone's looking at April.
yeah.
I don't ever in my recollection, I served finance committee 2 of the 3 years, but I don't remember necessarily seeing an asset list. Or I can't think of a reason why that would have been brought forward to the board at any point, for sure.
So let me ask a question. So how is an asset defined financially at a very basic level? Is it an asset, plant, equipment, and capital? Isn't that what constitutes?
GASB
assets?
defines it by, has a value in excess of $5,000, I think, is the cutoff.
If the intent is to, because this is providing something during budget, right? Is that something again through fiscal policy? We could
I think that'd be a good place to start.
I
Yeah.
agree.
be more,
Liam, I might suggest, can you just flip ahead to the next one, because it's the next subchapter, it's 502 1.2. And I beg your pardon, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, it's a
okay?
general comment, so go ahead,
no,
please. I don't want
all
to
right,
derail
okay.
it.
Just because this kind of follows through, and it was part of the same conversation as I recall, Nick. This itemized list of capital investments recommended for the next 5 years. What we don't do is we detail the first year of the 5 years, and then we tell you just kind of a placeholder and a title for the other ones. This would take it a next step further, and we'd fully build that out, that 5-year plan out. So I think, and I bring this up only because I think it was part of the same conversation. It's a way of really assessing what we have and knowing what's coming at us. And I think it's a conversation you have all had for years now. So sorry to distract, we can go back.
No, I mean, thank you for bringing it up because they are related there.
So a physical asset is an item of economic, commercial, or exchange value that has a material existence. So physical assets are known as tangible assets. For most businesses, they refer to properties, equipment, and inventory.
Right.
So I don't know where the origin of this was, but my guess is it probably had something to do with the list of land-owned property. Was that the discussion, or was just not that specific?
So I think this will go back to my general comment. So I think I've heard a couple times this evening, all of you refer to policies that you already have in place, and some of this seems duplicitous because you can change it. And I would say from my perspective as chairing this committee and working with the public on it, I think the way you need to interpret what we're saying to you is the public wants the council to behave in this manner. You may have policies set up in the background, but the people are saying, we want to see this behavior. What I'm hearing here is we have a policy and we'll police ourselves later. And I just want to kind of caution the council on the viewpoint they're taking with saying, we already have a policy, we can deal with it there. That's not what this document was about. This is the public coming to you and saying, this is how we want you to behave. You may have a policy in place. This may seem duplicitous, but this is what we don't want to see you deviate from as a base standard. That's just the general comment. So as you kind of look through and say, I already have a policy for this, we don't need to see in the charter. I just caution you on that mindset, because I think what you really have in front of you is a document the public brought to you and said, this is how we want to see you behave. This is how we want to see you account for things. So assets in general, I think they want to know, how many fire trucks, how long of a life. They want to know those things so they can wrap their mind around what's coming down the pike. Just a general, like I said, just a general comment.
Sure, and I can appreciate that, Nick. I still struggle a little bit, I think, with putting such specifics into the charter. And it's funny because I'm going to use the word specifics, but I think these are actually really vague. And so I'm not sure that putting it in the charter and not being more specific about exactly what the expectation is and what that reporting is doesn't require us to then go back and lean on the policy. And so in doing that, like we're just stacking something, we're adding something that is non-enforceable or comes across as vague to the charter. And I'm worried about doing that because then we're saying, well, we're going to go back and check ourselves with the policy. We should be accountable to our policies all the time. And so I can appreciate that the people want a list and they're telling us that and we're getting that feedback, but strengthening our financial policy could still be an objective to achieving that same goal, just not through the charter. And I know that wasn't, you're on the charter committee. So obviously this is coming through the charter. I don't know if 4 years from now, if the charter says, I want to see a list of all the assets, that we're necessarily answering the same question 4 years from now that they want answers to right now.
It's not just the list. I'm concerned about an assessment of the condition.
Right.
Just appreciate on our fixed assets, we're listing and valuing all of our roads and sidewalks, all of our buildings, all of our rolling stock equipment. I honestly don't know how I could competently and accurately comply with this requirement on an annual basis as part of the budget submission.
So take a road, for example, right? You consider that an asset.
Yes.
And you do work through Public Works where they grade, the condition of them. And you have a value, maybe it was probably the original value, or I don't know how you assign a value to it, honestly, but there's probably some accounting standard for it. But then you have to go from whatever that is to what is it the replacement cost, or is it the?
Is it all 351 lane miles that we have, or is it a general assessment
Is it state
overall?
supported or just local?
Right.
I'm not looking to confuse it. I'm the one that's gonna have to produce this, and I'm not sure what it is and how to comply with it on an ongoing annual basis, quite frankly.
I hadn't even thought of that.
That and making it part of the budget process, which is already a
Ken
big
has a
lift.
no on this, by the way, just in case you want to raise.
I think I agree with what Counselor Scyther said, just from the perspective of it is a little vague still, and it would still need work to define what this is, to work with Tom to make sure it's something that is meeting the actual intent of what I think the public wants, which as written, it's, it could go many different ways. So they may not get what they want, right? And so that's where,
That's my concern.
yeah.
Is we're gonna put something in the charter and we're still not delivering on what people want. And then people's interpretation of that 3, 4, 5 years from now is no longer the original intent.
You fight over the meaning of $400,000 for 5 years. Yeah.
But if you use that argument, we should just really terminate the discussion now in terms of reviewing the things that are before us from the charter. If we're saying, there's either no way to quantify it, number one, or it's already in there, but we're not following it if it's a financial policy. I'm going to use financial policy as a good example. We have a guideline in there in terms of our, unassigned fund balance, and we don't adhere to it. We don't follow it. We don't talk about it every year.
That's you saying that we don't. I disagree.
Okay,
When-
yeah.
when did we talk about it this year? In the budget
We'll give an example of how we're not in compliance with our fund balance policy.
There's a financial policy that says that if it falls below a certain figure, that we will take certain actions.
Exactly.
And we've fallen behind it several years in a row. We haven't taken any action.
Anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
No, but
right now.
but the reason I bring it up is if we're using the argument that the charter is really just high level, we shouldn't really talk about it if it's not specific and we can't enforce it. So it's a little bit of a, circular argument, so, I mean, I'm sure we'll come to things that are a little bit more definitive, but so far we seem to be in the mode of saying,
So elaborate. I mean, talk to me about what
Right, how
what
do
this
we
means
tighten
to
this
you.
up,
How
Don?
what effect is this going to have? What do you want to see as a result of this?
well, I mean, I think that it goes along the lines of, trying to, and Tom uses an example, highways, roads, sidewalks, that kind of thing. But do we have a record of all town-owned land, for example,
Yeah,
that
we do.
we review and
Yeah, we do.
talk about it as an asset? And it's not the budget.
Conservation Commission has to.
Whoa,
Mhm.
that's
Survey.
okay. But, so, my point is, it seems that there are things that came out of several months of the deliberation, that there was a reason behind it. Maybe what they're proposing doesn't hit exactly the right solution for delivering that. But I just think we're kind of, I think on the list in general, there weren't a lot of things, but there were several, there are a number of things that I think we're just passing off fairly quickly. And I don't know of any other way we would come back to that. So, anyway.
So am I hearing from the council that we don't want to move this forward? Or this is going to take more?
In the spirit of what Dawn is saying, I'm happy to continue a discussion on this as something to move forward, but I'm not comfortable with how it's currently written.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that out of this discussion, there are still things that maybe are not going to be resolved by us reviewing it as a charter amendment. We've kind of landed in that place several times so far, but I'd like for us not to lose the thought and think of a way for us to bring it up in another forum.
So, I mean, with all of these, we're not taking action today.
Today.
Right.
We're trying to narrow the
Sure.
focus so that we can have the lawyers and staff,
Weigh in.
produce what's going to go on the ballot. That having been said, so this one isn't totally clear to me.
Yeah.
But there's still time if you know, anybody wants to try to help to elaborate
Yeah.
and make sense of it.
Yeah, if you
I'm
can do
open.
something.
I
like that.
understand, yeah. I'm not sure this is the one, or, you know, it would be another angle, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah, and I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, and in that, right, I certainly don't want to go through every one of these and say, no, let's just go to policy, or no,
Right.
let's, like, that's definitely not my intent. So with the eye on that, I understand, and also taking into consideration that the charter committee recommended that these are charter additions,
Right.
that they felt that these required more weight. I struggle with implementation.
Yeah.
And just making sure that we actually do nail down the intent of the charter committee in a way that's going to be A, that Tom can deliver, and B, that, you know, is the appropriate interpretation of what exactly the charter committee was after when they wrote that.
So can we go and, because we got one more on the budget here, it's at the head of the budget, there will be a summary, blah, blah, blah. The budget summary shall state, I don't know, is that just ministerial? Doesn't seem to be any substantive change.
Substantive change, yeah.
Okay, right. And then under 503, we've got town council adoption of the budget.
Hold on, I think you
Can I
skipped
just
over
ask
one.
can I just ask a question?
Yep,
Going back to 502, so how are we going to resolve that?
yeah,
Who's-
thanks. I would ask that Mr. Hall and staff look at it in their way and maybe,
Can I
Yeah, go
suggest
ahead.
maybe that the finance committee
oh, there you
looks at it
go.
at the next finance
Yeah,
committee?
why don't we do
Because
that?
I agree with the intent of an exact statement of financial condition of the town is vague.
Yep,
And I think I understand the intent of what people are looking for and what they wrote. But I think the question is what's good information that allows us to assess the financial condition? And I'm sure there's best practices where financial health is
Yeah.
described that we
When
can
are you
probably come up with
meeting?
a list.
Well, so we have a meeting on the calendar for next Tuesday, which I was pretty much just going to use as a table setting meeting for our summer meetings. But I think that there is an
Yeah.
appetite to
we need to
discuss
do this, yeah.
the finance policy when things are slow is probably the best time to tackle that.
Yeah.
And
'Cause
so
we're on-
that will be,
We're under a timeline for this.
yep, and I
so-
can appreciate that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that. That makes sense. Thank you, Jonathan.
So on 502.1.2, the only other thing I'd say there is the first sentence references permanent improvements. And then the second one references capital investments. Those two should probably be aligned. Or
I
just
know,
the
I was gonna say,
terminology.
what, I don't.
Permanent improvements is probably, or capital improvements is probably the standard, but
I'll defer to you as the expert on this stuff, but I read that and went, what? Anyway, if I'm doing that, then
and then the other question is, are we approving a 5-year
Yeah.
spending plan?
Yeah.
For capital improvements, which is,
right, and that's what the finance committee's
Yeah,
gonna
okay.
look at. We're gonna
So
give them-
finance committee will consider this one as well, 502.
Yeah, hammer something out with this, yeah.
Yeah, here again, I think there's something there, the form that it's in, we're struggling with,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
I really do believe it would benefit us to spend more time on it, to
Yep.
try to
Mhm.
Yeah.
distill it. you
so
know.
I think finance committee is perfect. Okay, so now we're down to Article 5, Section 503. Town council adoption of budget. Oh, this is the one. Oh, yeah, it's got to do with the Board of Education and the this and the that. Oh, Lord. This is kind of a thoughts, anyone? Go ahead. John.
so Phil had some comments on this one as well.
Oh, great. Oh,
Um,
yes. Thank you.
It's, so the reason the council's action on the Board of Education budget isn't final is because, like we did yesterday, we voted to pass that on to the public.
Great.
This is kind of making that distinction, I think, a little in the charter, so it's a little confusing to me. I don't know that there's a need to distinguish between non-education and education budgets in this section. I forget what Phil's, and the other
Yeah,
thing
it's
is,
not on this letter we got today.
it's changing the default. Let's say we don't adopt a budget.
Yeah,
It's
that was the
bringing
issue.
it's putting the current year budget instead of the town manager's proposed. That's a pretty substantial change, especially if there's something that is happening, thinking COVID or
Hmm.
with that requires more current intel.
I wonder if Phil's just got a incorrect reference. He provides comments on section 504, which I don't think there were any
Oh,
recommended
right,
changes
yeah,
to.
yeah, that's why I'm saying.
I think he incorrectly
It's got it incorrect.
referenced.
So it's Phil's thing, and it says, under section, it says 5.4 says, if it is the town's intent, if a proposed budget is not adopted within 30 days from submission, anyway, for the proposed budget to become the budget for fiscal year. I remember that the phrase as presented by the town manager is not deleted, as the absence of that phrase leads to ambiguity, some ambiguity.
Well, what you have, as I understand it, is there's two. The practice has been that it goes back to the last budget proposed for the school, right, if it's not approved. But for the town, it goes to the last year's budget.
And state statute, I think.
So a state
deals
statute
with
is- says
the school
governs
then.
the former
school.
one, governs the school. And I always remember that was definitely much more favorable way of handling non-approval for the schools than is advocated here for the town. And the reason is there's no state statute saying you can't do that.
Yeah, for towns, right?
Right.
Schools, go ahead, Nick.
So if I remember correctly, the big shift here and the discussion was centered around, it says here it's presented by the town manager, and that was what was to be adopted. I think the shift here was to say it's the town council, their responsibility for the budget to make sure it passed. They wanted to shift the impetus on proposed budget from the council to make sure it was a council approved, not a town manager presented one. That was the big discussion.
Okay,
Just
it's a big difference.
right. And I think that was the intent, whether the language hit it home or not. That's up to you guys and the attorneys, but
You
that-
too.
not yet.
Soon, right?
So I think the intent was clear here as I'm hearing it from the charter committee chair and, representing, what the intent was. So here again, I don't think I'd want to stop by just saying the language isn't right if we're not trying to get the right answer.
Well, do we want this to go to finance also? Oh, sorry,
Can I
Lynn.
just take a stab at this? So currently, the process is that the council ultimately approves a budget and sends it to the voters. If the school budget portion isn't validated, then the budget that the council approved to go to referendum prevails until a budget is validated. So essentially, the council holds the authority. So if it's too high, then it stays in that too high status until the budget's revised, brought back to the voters and validated, and then that one would prevail. The intention behind this change was, so that's why they specifically, my recollection, and Nick will correct me, my recollection was you specifically carved out the non-Board of Education budget because there's statute that speaks to that process. So they didn't want to touch that. What they did want to say, though, was they also wanted to change, I think, I forget what language you used, Councilor Clucci, but they wanted to change the burden. So as constructed now, the town manager submits a budget to council. Council has 60 days to take action. In the event they don't take action, then then the manager's budget prevails. That's what we're going to work off of. What this does is it says if the council fails to take action, the intention here is that it reverts back to the prior year budget, essentially the spending allocation.
Right.
So if the municipal budget portion of the budget was $30 million in FY21, and the council took no action for the FY22 budget, then the spending authority would remain at $30 million. Whereas if the town manager's budget was $32 million, the council failed to take action now, then it would be $32 million. So that's
Yeah.
what they were looking for.
This explanation was a lot better than
Yeah,
mine.
Sounds
I get
great.
what you're
Thank you.
saying. I just worry, like, again, this has to go to the voters to vote on. So how do we make it clear and simple for them to understand. Because again, I think we know a lot more that we're bringing into the conversation that I think the people who are voting on this might look at this, at least as it's written today, and even as you described it, like what's the simple language that gets across the right intent of what you just said?
If I could offer a suggestion, I think that the first thing to tackle is that change with regard to the municipal budget? Is there interest on the council to see that change? If there is, then we can work on the language. If there's not, then it's
So
kind of.
the decision is, rather than going with the town manager's proposal as the budget until a decision is made, we're just keeping with the prior year budget instead until a decision is made.
And
Which
I
was
would,
approved by the public.
Previous, well, not the town side of the
No,
budget.
last year's budget was approved by the public.
We're talking,
no, I was talking municipal side.
The budget doesn't vote on the town budget. They vote on the school budget.
So just the one thing I would point out is because it doesn't have to go to referendum and the way I think there are other portions of the charter that speak to when the budget has to be presented. We'd never be on the municipal side, we would never be in a position where we would be operating under the town manager's budget into that actual fiscal year. Something would have to happen. Either the council would take action affirmatively or not prior to July 1. So there'd be no, unlike the school budget where you kind of keep on going back, there would be no operating under an incorrect or invalid budget.
I believe the way that the charter is currently prepared, on one hand, you hire a town manager presumably on merit and task me with proposing a budget based on my professional assessment of what the needs of the town are. So I start the conversation. I think this is intentionally time limited to make sure the council does act. Ultimately, that you don't simply stonewall. There's nothing that I see here would require you to do something else if you just simply wanted to revert back to last year's budget, and so it's purposely distasteful that if you don't do anything, you're going to go with what I propose. And so I think it acts as a motivation for the council to work through the process and to ultimately adopt a new spending plan for the upcoming fiscal year.
But is that what the committee said?
Yeah,
No,
I think
that's-
that's about where we landed. Yeah, we wanted to motivate the council to make sure that they did their work.
Well, I'm simply saying that I think as currently constructed, there's probably all the motivation you need, because if you, due to your inaction, whatever I propose or whoever sits in my chair is what becomes the budget. And the alternative is that a council who wants to stonewall, you'd simply not take any action on my proposal whatsoever. And we're using last year's approval, which could be problematic.
The other piece that I think is missing is in section 506, we have the authority to change the budget. Town manager has to bring something forward or a recommendation forward. But even though, so there's another safety net there. Not that we can't, I assume that we'd be able to twist Tom's arm if we really felt strongly to propose budget change if we needed to. Or we'd have bigger issues that we need
Right.
to deal with. That is the really worst case
You'd be
scenario.
finding a new manager.
Right. Right.
What did Ken say on this one?
Yes.
No.
No, he said no to everything.
I guess I'm still unclear on intent. Because, and maybe it's just because the way Tom is able to frame it, to me, it seems far more motivating to a council to do something if Tom presents a budget or we're stuck with Tom's budget. Because,
They're usually pretty good budgets.
right, well, I mean, with all due respect, and we shouldn't even be talking about us and you, because the charter, right, is supposed to protect all of us when we're all long gone and,
Right,
Tom has happily sailed into retirement. Like the intent being a council that is not in agreement with the town manager over budget process or whatever it may be, that is able to just sit on their hands and refuse to entertain the town manager's budget, then
Right.
the charter wants us to be able to do that.
It goes back to the previous year is what it's saying, right?
But again,
Okay,
So
The
there would be-
intention is it goes back to the
Correct.
authorized prior year. Again, doesn't say that, but the spending allocation. And then
Right.
there's some discussion, if, again, I think Nick will recall this as well. There's some discussion about how to even phrase that. Because are you talking about net budget? Are you talking about gross budget? Are you talking about mill rate? What are you talking about that's being locked in by a lack of action from the council?
Right.
I mean, for
maybe
me,
never be so
yeah.
broken.
I mean, when you
My
think about,
goodness.
yeah, I know, I hope that,
Oh, I
you know, I view this more and more like a continuing resolution for the federal budget, where if you don't, if Congress or whoever can't agree on the budget, then they pass a continuous resolution
Right.
where you still operate under the prior year budget. So
Right.
I think it sounds like that's kind of the intent, which, you know, whether it's the town manager's proposed budget or the previous year budget, to me, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, like, the council needs to approve. That's the primary role of one of the primary roles is to approve a budget. And so it feels like the intent of 503 is really to try and create some sort of carrot or stick.
Right.
And I think whether it's the town manager's budget or continuing resolution, to me is they're both kind of equally like not good.
Yeah.
So I just don't really personally like, it could stay as is, or we could change it. It makes sense logically to think of it more as like a continuous resolution where we just continue to operate under the prior year
So what
budget.
do we want to do with this?
Finance committee.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
So
He
stay,
is bold with that recommendation.
stay with that for
Get a
one
little
second.
heavy-handed here.
Stay with that for 1 second. Say, for example, if that's really what we understand, you go to prior year's budget. What happens if the economy goes into the tank and inflation continues? And we're in the next budget year or next 2 or 3 years from now, we're deep into, a recession or depression. So then you would have a budget that if you're forced to use last year's budget, it would be higher than what you need to do. You need to make cuts. So you'd be forced to be saddled with a budget that wouldn't work.
Well, that's only if the council doesn't.
Yeah,
do what they're supposed to be doing.
that's in the event of inaction by the council. The council could correct that by approving a new spending plan, which could be lower.
Right.
Arguably, right?
Mhm.
Just,
But the problem I have here is that I think there's a big gap between what I understand the intent was on a couple of these things. And we're going to go to the finance committee to try to like clarify what their intent was. Well, actually, it's not the finance committee that came up with these recommendations. It was the charter commission. So I'm not, there's a little bit of a gap for me there. And then this is no knock on the finance committee, who I respect and do good work, but we're going to the wrong place to get an answer to that question, if that's the question.
Yeah, but the finance committee, they're not the people in the finance committee, but the actions of the finance committee, what finance committees do, it makes sense for them to take a look at it, come up with, what's gonna be the best
Mhm.
option.
And we
in
can,
my
we
opinion.
can always
April's-
invite the committee to join us in
I was
that
gonna say,
conversation.
I'm happy to invite Chair of the Charter Committee to join us at Finance.
And another quick thought. I don't know if I heard from you whether it was worth even pursuing before you kick it to finance committee. If you don't,
Right,
if you don't
that's-
Well,
believe
that's the
there's.
thing. I don't,
yeah,
I honestly, I'm
Before
with
you
John.
create work
Like, I
over
don't
there,
know.
I think you should probably figure out whether it's worth pursuing even the
Most of
change.
these were
And I
concession.
hesitate to
think,
kick it to
because
finance because I
we
think
didn't-
John and I both
you wanted
see
to carry them on,
the
but most of
devil in
council-
both.
That's how we got to finance committee.
No,
What are you gonna do?
let me just respond to that. I appreciate the gesture that we would try to go to solve some of the questions that I've raised. Hopefully on behalf of the other charter commission, as I understand it. So maybe that's not the way to solve for these, but I still think that there's an underlying issue that I don't think we should just leave as we move past, or deciding on what's going to go forward to the public to vote on from the charter commission. I
Well,
just,
well,
and maybe there's another way, or another forum to bring that up, but
we can do a straw poll right now. We can say, who wants this to go? Who wants it to? Anyone want this to go out?
I have a question for Nick.
Go ahead.
Strong feelings about this? Like, I guess I would defer to the Charter Committee on this one. If they had really strong feelings that this should be the inaction of the council, then I'll say, yes, it should be entertained.
It was voted by majority to go to you in this condition. Now, again, we also footnoted This never went through legal. This is basically the citizenry kind of coming up with some concepts and ideas, and we did our best to
Okay.
wordsmith it. I think Liam's kind of recap of how this came about really hit it home, which was they're really almost like two steps, like what happens if the school budget keeps failing? Like, what do you guys do? You know, so I think that was really what we're trying to get to. And
Well,
whether we
that's the
come
state deals with that.
On the
State statute
yes.
deals with school budgets.
on school budget.
On school budgets.
What happens with the
municipal,
municipal side?
right.
So is it worth talking about? I don't know if you feel there's enough there. I mean, yes, this committee felt there was, and that's why it's here in front of you.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
getting real mixed vibes. Is this going forward? Is it not? Where's it going? What are we doing? Time's running low here, guys.
I think we have a mechanism in place for inaction of the council. So this would be shifting that from accepting Tom's budget to sticking with the previous year's budget.
Could I ever just two
I don't
comments?
know.
You know, this is, we operate on the council manager form of government. And I think this is probably very evident just in these few words here. I think there's very clear powers and authorities granted and imposed upon me as manager and conversely or similarly on council. And I think budget is a great example of how that interplay works. On one hand, you task the manager to propose a budget, to start that conversation where he or she thinks it should be. And I think failing none, every time I've presented the budget from that podium, I've said, and now it's yours to do what you will with it.
Right.
And so this scenario of the council inaction has never happened. In modern history, it's happened by virtue of this validation vote failing. But the council's always found the proper motivation. Maybe it's the 60-day clock, but we've put together a schedule that seems workable. So it seems as though the council can do its business and ultimately arrive at a point that collectively you support. So, you know, I don't know that it's broken because I don't think the council's ever failed to act, frankly. And in the event that school budgets don't get passed, state law prevails. What happens in the meantime? And ultimately, you do get it passed. Sometimes it's August, but we do.
But not this time.
No.
I honestly don't know if we fail to pass the school budget and pass it on to the voters. I don't know what happens. I know what happens if we pass it to the voters and they say no, then it defaults to our budget until we have 30 days to put it, or so many days to put it back in front of them. Okay. I'm not sure either.
Well, I mean, you have to pass. I mean, you have to pass a school budget. You have to approve, you approve a municipal budget. You're obligated to pass a municipal budget. And a component of that is the overall budget, and a component of that's the school budget, which then goes to referendum, right?
So, but by carving this out, the board, the BOE piece, what happens if we don't? So if we don't pass the budget, school and town,
Mhm.
what's
Goes
going
to
to the voters for
referendum.
the school?
Yeah, I guess I would.
Is it the last year budget? But no, because this is being specific to town.
Fair question.
But don't we
Yeah,
say it follows whatever
Know the
state
answer.
law?
State law covers the Board of Education side of it.
Right.
But
Which is the budget that we approve, goes to the voters. That's what the state law
so
says.
you're saying you get presented with a budget under the change here, you take no action, reverts back to the prior year spending levels. I think that's the budget that would then go to voters for consideration. I think that if that gets
Yes.
voted down, you have to modify it somehow, presuming you say, okay, well, the voters didn't like that, so now we have to change it. Then I think then what happens to the municipal side?
I
Because you
think that's-
essentially authorize the spending level. Are you taking then, if you say you increase it, are you taking it out of the municipal side of the budget because you've already approved? It's a great process question.
I
which
think
don't
that's a
we-
really important distinction you just made, Liam, which is something has to go to referendum. And so is what goes to referendum the town manager's proposed budget if the town does not take action? Or is it last year's budget recycled that goes to referendum? Like, I think that's actually what we're talking
So
about,
stay
because
with
we can't literally do nothing. We
The state-
have to put
State
something to
law says
referendum.
it's
Yeah.
what's approved by the town council. So
I think you could. You'd be in violation of charter, but so what? I don't know what the consequence of that is.
I was gonna say. what's the
So,
consequence?
but I think I think this is a good point that April makes. So it's that you're trying to apply the standard that works for the Board of Ed to the town in the event of a budget not being approved, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So is that something worth moving forward or not, and refining the language hopefully. So it seems to me that's a pretty big question.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop at, I don't know what they're saying. Okay, that's where we were a few minutes ago.
So what are we gonna do with this? Cause it's 5 minutes to 7.
Hey,
The more
time,
we talk about
you know.
this one in particular, the more I get confused. And the
Yeah.
more,
I know.
because again, I worry like when we bring this to the public, they're not gonna necessarily
So where
understand
do
the
we
committee's
wanna
intent.
work on this? Do we wanna hammer this in finance? Or do we wanna have this one particular thing come back for another discussion with council? Because again, we're under the gun to get this stuff out so that it can go to the voters.
So let's have finance take a crack at it,
Okay,
and then finance will represent it during our next
Okay.
charter revision
does that
conversation.
sound good?
Yeah, I would just like to say though, and I think the additional conversation that we've had has helped, at least for me,
Yeah.
clarify
Yeah.
a nut here. And if we can't get that straight and explain it to the public, then John's absolutely right.
Yeah,
We need to go
Right.
do something.
Mhm.
Yep.
all right,
Thank you.
next, Article 7, zoning board of appeals, I think.
Bill did have a comment here.
Yeah, he did, a long one. This amendment would add word zoning to the name of the Board of Appeals. This is inconsistent with the name of the board as established by zoning ordinance, which is simply called the Board of Appeals. Through that ordinance, in section 5 of zoning ordinance, the town committee's board manual found in chapter 302A of town ordinance. On the other hand, both refers to the board as the zoning board of appeals in the title of the relevant section, but simply as Board of Appeals in the description. Whichever name is preferred, all relevant ordinance provisions should be amended to ensure consistency. So here we go. To me, it's a ministerial type thing. Is this something that needs to go to the voter, or is it something that we can just fix?
Just clean up.
I can give you an example. So I had a land use dispute in Old Orchard. And it was unclear, it had to go to Superior Court, but it was unclear if that should go to the Board of Appeals. And there was precedent where
Right.
the judge, 2 years after, deciding, said, no, you should have gone to the town's Board of Appeals as a more generic body,
Right.
as opposed to, even though it's not typically something they would deal with. So I think there may be precedent why it's worded as Board of Appeals, and then it's maybe morphed into, being specific to zoning. And that's probably why it's
My
inconsistent.
recollection, I don't think the committee had any great heartburn. They thought that was
No,
just if it's zoning board, let's refer to it.
They picked up on the.
We weren't aware of kind of the internal conflict. My suggestion is that you don't approve, you keep it Board of Appeals, because that's how it exists in the zoning ordinance, which is the most important
Okay.
piece.
Just leave it alone then.
So move on.
It's defined as
Then
and
strike
clear.
that other zoning word out of the other section, as he pointed out. It was just a cleanup item.
Yep,
Right.
yeah, we'll do that ourselves through the 302 change.
Okay, next.
Taking the Z out of the ZBA.
Article 8, nominations and elections. This is changing the elections basically from November to June for the Board of Education and Town Council. I will tell you that I'm hearing pretty much straight across the board from folks I've talked to and from Mr. Ken. Was this in capital? No. The people are not interested in making that change. Am I correct in that assumption?
I'm gonna fight for this one. I understand on the municipal side that we take into account for voter turnout is lower in June, and, we really try and have it during November. It does not work for the Board of Ed. It is disruptive. The training, the statewide training that happens for Board of Education members happens in October. So in a year when the board has 3 open seats and they onboard 3 new members, those members go an entire year without the opportunity for state
We
training.
need to talk to the state.
Well, I'll have MSMA or MSBA rather turn the whole convention around, but other districts do elect in June. And so there is an argument to be made. We're certainly not the only district that would be electing school board members in June. If we're talking about the school budget referendum being important enough to hold in June, then I have a really hard time straight face saying we can't elect officials in June. The school budget referendum is the single biggest investment that the town votes on every single year. So we should have turnouts that warrant that weight of that decision. And so I have a hard time with the argument that we don't have good turnouts in June, so we shouldn't elect our elected officials in June.
Yesterday's turnout stunk.
I understand
And we
that.
had a town council seat.
I understand that. So lumping in elected officials with a gubernatorial race or a presidential race, I understand gets us to a larger turnout. But then why don't we vote in those years? Why don't we vote on the municipal election or in the school budget rather in October, November? Like it doesn't,
Fiscal year.
You can change your
I know, right. Well, let's change the fiscal year. Like.
So I am very sensitive to the issue that I understand is really at the core of this, and that is that you're talking about onboarding and getting an elected body, a very important elected body, up to speed and functioning, forming, storming, norming, it takes time to do that. It takes months to do that. Even in the changes we've had in the council with one counselor, think of the disruption we've had with, I'm not pointing any fingers, it's just a fact. It takes people time to get used to working with one another in different roles. Okay, that's a fact.
And for the school year, if they don't get started, if they get elected in November and it takes several months to get their feet under them, the school year is basically over and budget season is crashing down on their shoulders.
So I get all of that. The however for me is
Right.
that it seems to me it'd be a lot easier to work on orienting the folks that, that get elected, off cycle in another way than to change everything around and have it go to a mid-year.
And
That
and
just-
municipal.
But it's not mid-year for the school. I understand it's mid-year for the municipality.
Right.
And so I can see the distinction there. But what you're suggesting is that we change the school year to align with when we elect our officials. We should be electing our officials in line with the school year.
I just think in terms of if you step back a couple of giant steps and if our goal here is to make sure that we have the best understanding of what the public's will is, that's done with the largest number of voters,
Right.
regardless of the issue.
Right.
That is the number one rule. So if that's the number one rule, we should all strive to make sure that happens. And even the idea of separating out the Board of Ed and leaving everything else the same, for fall elections and taking the benefit of, gubernatorial and presidential races, that sort of thing. The issue I have is that I mean, you and I got our start in politics running in 2018, in an issue that motivated the whole town that was not restricted to just the Board of Ed, or the town. It was a bigger thing than that. So that sort of synergy and that sort of public engagement and involvement, I think we lose if we separate it out and we do it, differently than the way we have it now.
Can we ask the committee why they recommended June and what the vote was?
So the representative from the Board of Education came to us and said we would prefer to see our elections held in June. And so committee discussed it. I almost want to say, I think the footnotes indicate what the vote was on the Board of Education side. I think it was 8-0. The municipal one came up afterwards. I said, well, if you're going to hold school board elections, why not municipal elections? And the concept behind that was, and having just gone through this, as of yesterday, it's pretty fresh in my mind. Not having to answer questions about Donald Trump or Joe Biden or something when you talk to people was really kind of refreshing. It was a community focused discussion. And that was kind of the motivation to say, okay, why not the council too? Why not keep the June elections just about our budget, our people, our leaders, and not get drowned out by national topics? And that barely passed. I think it passed 5-4.
And if I could just interject, having been through a few cycles, different elections and whatever's going on. June seems to get hijacked frequently by specific interest groups to drive the turnout, i.e. in years when the budgets, for example, were a big deal. I like to see as many people as possible in the elections. This is why the elections are held in November. And secondly, on the municipal side, we've got the other issue. If we've got an election in June, we just got done, no, it doesn't work for our cycle. So that's why you see a lot of municipal elections are November elections for large municipalities. Ones who don't have town meetings, which are in March or April. So anyway, I know, but again, I'm just telling you what I was hearing anecdotally from everyone other than April.
I support this going to the voters.
That this is a no, just leave it alone, so.
So I'm gonna toss April alone. I am a no for municipal elections in June, but I am willing to hear more. And maybe the Board of Ed would like to weigh in on this one. I am not opposed to sending that to the voters if there's
For just the
strong
board of
support
Ed
from the
being in
Board of Ed.
June.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, if they want to do
I
that.
could get behind
I
that
think
too.
they're nuts, but it's fine.
We're running.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you what you want to do, Mr. Chair. Because we've still got recall. We've got a couple of-
So did we conclude on that one?
Well, what I heard was we're not gonna pursue municipal elections in
But the
June,
board,
but we're gonna look to
three-
hear more
3-2 would go.
from the,
Board of
about the Board of Ed.
So that
going
needs to
June.
be rewritten.
It would need to be
Yeah.
rewritten and we'd be looking to, yes,
Yeah.
It's just the.
we're not looking to kill it today.
We'll see it again.
Maybe,
I'm looking at the chair because we are into regular over workshop.
Can I just make a comment about this?
please.
How much time did we, it's a question really, how much time did we spend? How much time how big was the committee and how much time did they spend on this work?
I was going to commend you because it was 9 people, 3 staff members in 6 months, and you're trying to chew it off in an hour and a half. So God
That's
bless you.
cannot be.
Just a summary piece. So I think we're gonna have to continue the workshop. I
That's
think that
fine.
was expected anyways.
Yeah.
But Tom or Liam, do you see other pieces that would be beneficial for us to discuss today?
I might recommend that there's obviously some of the larger issues being referred to Finance Committee for some further understanding
Right.
and maybe clarification. That work can happen next week. I know we don't have another council meeting till June 20th or July 20th. Perhaps there will be interest in having a workshop on this between those 2 dates. We can finish going through these other items and also further digest those budget issues.
We are.
Halfway through it, roughly?
I think we're more than halfway.
No, there's only a couple items actually left, but they're kind of heavy.
Some meaty ones.
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
meaty stuff in there.
Yeah, so why don't we continue this workshop? I'll work with Jean Marie and council to schedule it. And then we'll recess for 3 minutes and start our regular meeting. Thank you.
To be continued.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
you.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the Scarborough Town Council's June 15th regular meeting. And I'll call this meeting to order. And would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you help me with the roll call, please, Tiffany?
Counselor Seider,
Here.
Counselor Anderson,
Here.
Counselor Katarina,
Here.
Counselor Hamel,
Here.
and Chairman Clucci,
Here.
all present. Counselor Johnson is absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 4 is, well, first, I'd like to apologize for being a little bit late. We had a workshop that ran over. And I just want to let everybody know that I've agreed with the town clerk that all votes today will be by show of hands, if everybody's amenable to that. Okay. Okay, general public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on an item that is not on our agenda this evening? If so, you can come up to the podium and state your name and address, or raise your hand if you're online. Seeing none. Moving on to item 5, which is minutes from the June 8th, 2022 regular town council meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? And it's unanimous. Thank you. Does anybody have any suggested adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, I signed the treasurer's warrants just a few minutes ago. And item 8 is the town manager's report.
Thank
Tom.
you, Mr. Chairman. We just met last week, so I don't have much to report just in the course of the week. Just a quick update on our ongoing recruitments for senior staff. We are looking to schedule first round interviews for both planning director and public works director next week. And we'll have finance director up and running by the end of this week, I'm quite sure. I want to make the public aware that we are still going through the facilities, parks and facilities master plan process. Part of that process includes a survey. There were surveys sent out directly to Scarborough homes. We've now entered into kind of the public phase. So now it's open, that survey is open to anyone who wishes to take it. And there's a link right on our website if anyone's interested, and I encourage people to do so. Another point of interest, Costco, it's a big project that the council is aware of in the past. It's been kind of quiet for many months. I know they've been meeting with staff, working through some of the particulars on traffic study and the like. They have made formal site plan submission. And so that project is moving forward. Planning board will be taking that up in coming months. As regards the Scarborough Downs Growth Management Ordinance exemption, Councilor Chair Clucci and myself have seen an initial draft from the town attorneys and have provided some feedback to that. I expect that document, I hope, will be sufficient that we can send it to opposing counsel and to Crossroads team by the end of this week. And so I think we're still generally on track with the timeline that I've discussed in the past. I would hope by perhaps as soon as the end of next week that we'll have a document we're able to share. And we're committed in looking at some sort of public process, starting with a workshop as soon as can be scheduled, presumably the end of June or sooner. So stay tuned in that regard. I did also want to provide just a general update. 3 members of this council are aware of some of these issues. They sit as the Fair Hearing Authority. This is a group that hears appeals for general assistance matters. There, I believe they've heard 3 so far. And it really, I think, is suggestive of kind of a change that's occurring. There's a number of folks that are presenting themselves, making application for general assistance support and are being qualified for that support. Many of these folks are in the process of transitioning out of some of the temporary housing that's been provided for some time now through the emergency rental assistance program. We're not exactly sure, the magnitude of this, but it's worth noting and something that we'll pay fairly close attention to. As part of the FY23 budget, we did include additional resources that you supported for general assistance. And at this point, I suspect that those won't be sufficient, even with the state reimbursement at 70%. So we'll be following this very closely. this isn't just a bottom line budget matter. First and foremost, it's complying with state law and it's supporting folks in time of need. We're just being presented with really an unprecedented amount of requests at this point that we'll work through. I guess finally, just to remind the council and the public, we will be entering the summer meeting schedule, which does have the council meeting officially once in the months of July and August. As was discussed earlier, I suspect there will be many more meetings than that, but officially there'll be 2 regular meetings through the course of the summer. And I guess finally, I just want to congratulate all the candidates that put themselves out there yesterday. Our turnout was, and I think the clerk will speak to this later, was fairly light, just over 3,000 ballots cast. But again, I just acknowledge and appreciate the candidates putting themselves out there. I certainly congratulate Councilor-elect McGee for his successful campaign to get on council. I look forward to working with you. With that, I'm available for questions.
Any questions for Tom? So I'll use the opportunity now. I've talked with some of you about, as Tom mentioned, we've had a steep increase in the request for general assistance, and there's clearly something going on. And what we're learning is that people are being evicted on pretty short notice. And I have been working on potential measures that we might consider. I don't have anything that I'm bringing forward today, but I am continuing to pursue those. And we had an initial conversation with the town attorney. So I guess just a heads up that something might be coming in that regard. People are being put out on the streets. So it's, and the fact is, there's very limited places for them to go with us entering the summer tourist season. So, with that, I'm going to move into order number 22-041, which is a 7 p.m. public hearing, and schedule a second reading on the proposed amendments to Chapter 405, the Town of Scarborough zoning ordinance, Section 4, administration, Section 6, definitions, and Section 9, performance standards. And this is coming from the Ordinance Committee. Don, did you want to tee this up?
Yeah, I'll take a start. I'll take a start and then maybe ask for help from Tom on this. But this came forward as initially motivated by a need for us to update our ordinances on manufactured housing. We had a lot of very dated ordinances that went back to the 50s or something like that, that use terminology that's no longer accurate or current or appropriate. The other part of it was to kind of clean up our licensing fees and to make sure that that's included with our other schedule of fees. So this was partly a repeal and replace as well as a cleanup and trying to get this more in line with other things we charge fees for. We spent a fair amount of time on this in committee, and it's come forward to the council. But in addition to that, there's been other conversations with the planning board, and there have been continuing issues that have been raised by Teresa DeFoss and also Tina Marie Smith and their legal representatives, requesting other changes that are substantive and other wording changes to make sure the ordinances are accurate and current. Some of this, there's discrepancy between the terms that exist at federal law that haven't been updated at state level yet. So that's kind of where we are on it. And I've had conversations with the parties and also with Tom and Chairman Clucci. So that's kind of where we are right now. And this is just a reminder that this is a public hearing. It's not a second reading or vote. There's another week or so that would be involved in that.
Good. Yeah, so like I said, this came to us as a first reading. And there has been a public hearing held at the planning board, and now we're having a public hearing here. Tom, did you have anything to add?
I would just acknowledge that the next two orders are related. I think Councilor Hamill, I would note that the next two orders on your agenda, 42 and 43, are related. Councilor Hamill kind of teed this up. We'll have separate public hearings, but just appreciate that they're all interrelated.
Okay. With that, are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this item? If so, please come up to the podium, state your name and address. Or if you're online, raise your hand.
Hi, my name is Nina McKee, 309 Black Point Road. And I think I spoke about this last meeting about the trailers and in the manufactured housing community. I realized, Tom, that all these next three items are pretty related. So I'm not going to stand up and talk every time. This is my one shot. It's my one shot. So I have a concern and some questions. And I hope that you take this with not being derogatory and not being nasty, because I know how hard everybody works. And I just want to express my little voice. So I have concerns and questions about changes in section 6 of the zoning ordinance regarding definitions and changing the wording trailer park to manufactured community housing. At the last meeting, I asked why the change, and it was basically kind of because it sounded better, which it does. So the new proposal, part of it, there's lots of, this is full of lots of changes, which sound all fine, except for the one thing that says, notwithstanding any other provision in this ordinance to the contrary, any modular home that meets construction standards for state certified manufactured homes adopted pursuant to the Title 10, Section 9042, this is the kicker, are allowed in all zones where other single-family homes are allowed. And I think there are a lot of red flags there, because it's that old thing, not in my backyard. But I do think that if manufactured homes are allowed, and there, as I understand it, there can be certainly more than one. It can be 3, 4, 5, whatever. I think that's a problem. And I just don't know whether there should be some kind of zoning that would be specific to this situation. That's one thing. And I also wondered if the manufactured community housing is exempted from the GMO. I don't know. So I'm thinking that probably the reason for these changes, and I might be wrong, is because we have a big shortage of housing for people, not only low income, but also workforce. And so I keep having manufactured home communities might help alleviate that situation. But I do see red flags. I think that when these modular homes are going to be built in single family homes, say in a meadow next to somebody's house, I just think there's going to be a lot of flack. So I think it's just something to consider. So thank you very much. And I won't speak again because it's all related. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public that would like to speak? Please come on up.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you. My name is Teresa DeVossis, and I'm president of State Manufactured Homes, Hillcrest Manufactured Housing Community, and also Pinecrest Manufactured Housing Community. Our company has been in Scarborough for 78 years. We're a family-owned and operated business, and we're proud to be here. We have, at the present time, 423 manufactured homes in both Hillcrest and Pinecrest, and we're adding an additional 31 lots at this time, which should be done hopefully in the next few months. Although we appreciate your proposal to repeal Chapter 500, the ordinance relating to trailers and trailer camps adopted in 1944. That ordinance is clearly outdated and insulting to the residents of manufactured housing communities. We can't imagine passing an ordinance like that in today's day and age, and we're grateful that you're thinking of repealing it. And although we also appreciate your attempt to modernize the licensing of manufactured housing communities through Chapter 405, changes to the zoning ordinance, and Chapter 1019, manufactured housing community licensing ordinance, I urge you to return both of these to the ordinance committee. The provisions of both these proposed ordinances are flawed. I have personally waited 53 years to see Chapter 500 changed, and I don't want to see it rushed in the last couple months. We urge you to send it back to the ordinance committee. Examples of sorry if you've heard this speech before, because I've given it many, many times to the planning board, the ordinance committee, the council, and everybody else. But obviously I haven't been listened to. Some of the examples of the flaws in the zoning ordinance. On page 2, section 6, those units constructed after June 15th of 1976, commonly called newer mobile homes, that the manufacturer certifies are constructed in compliance with the HUD code. And you go on to say, meaning structures transportable in one or more sections that in the traveling mode are 14 body feet or more in width and are 750 square feet that are built on a permanent chassis. This reference to the wording of the HUD code is incorrect. The correct wording follows. Manufactured homes mean a structure transportable in one or more sections, which in the traveling mode is 8 body feet or more in width, or 40 body feet or more in length, which when erected is a total of at least 320 square feet. That may seem like an inconsequential number, but it means an awful lot in the industry. If you don't comply with the HUD code, then the federal codes, you're not in compliance with the federal codes, which only means more litigation on your part. Although the town attorney found the definition included in the proposed changes in the section of Maine law, Title 30, Section A, Section 4358, that's not the definition of the federal code. And I urge you to please adopt the wording that's correct. Manufactured housing communities, another part in Y1. Each manufactured housing community lot shall be at least 30 feet wide by 70 feet long. We suggested replacing that number 1 with number 4 on your document. The lot sizing should be a square foot requirement rather than a dimensional requirement. We proposed a 2,100 square foot requirement at the initial meeting with Mr. Hall and the town attorney. That was added to, not replaced by. So instead of having 2,100 square feet, we now have 2,100 square feet and also 30 feet by 70 feet for each lot. And that just doesn't work. Lots in manufactured housing communities should be arranged in rows. Why should that be the rule for our manufactured housing communities? Nothing else in town has to be erected in rows. Why should our housing have to be? We believe this should be removed as it only forces us to stay in the structure of a trailer park, and that's not who we are today. In section Y3, no manufactured home shall be permitted to park closer than 5 feet to the sideline, which define the manufactured housing community lot, nor shall it be parked so that it is closer than 10 feet to any other manufactured home. Manufactured homes are not parked, they're erected. They're installed, but they are not parked. This is a point we would really like you to pay attention to. Manufactured homes are not something you can hook up to a truck like you do an RV and move it around. This parking term is outdated and only serves to demean manufactured housing communities. Homes can and will change over time, and so will the footprint of the home. As long as the home remains 20 feet from the adjacent buildings, we should be able to change the footprint of the new structure from the previous structure. We believe all manufactured housing communities are unique because the lots are licensed, not the homes. When you have a manufactured housing community, we're licensed by the number of sites we have, not by the homes that are on those sites. On chapter 1019, the town of Scarborough Housing Community Licensing should be reconsidered by the ordinance committee also. The purpose of the ordinance is to make sure the community owners file a list with a tax assessor by April 1st of each year, giving the name of the owner of each home, the address, the year of manufacture, the size and make of the home for taxation purposes. Make that the requirement of the licensing ordinance. Because manufactured housing communities are licensed and inspected by the state, it is necessary to why is it necessary to also license them by the town of Scarborough? Wouldn't it be better to require that anyone applying for manufactured housing community license have a state license? That would keep everybody on point and would save you all the aggravation and me the aggravation. Under section 2, item 4, this is a very interesting one. After such investigations have been made as the town council may deem advisable, the town council shall approve or disapprove the license application. What does that mean to you? Does it change according to the members of the council? When you change, the rules change? There's no performance standard, that's all it says. Would you like your home to be inspected every year according to the whim of the council? Not that there is anything wrong with the council whims, but they sometimes can be unpredictable. So we would like you to consider these changes, and we would like you to send this back to the ordinance committee and get it right rather than rush it to judgment. Thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
John, just a question. Can I make a request? Those are quite detailed. Would it be possible for us to get a written copy of your
I have
remarks?
10 copies for you. Don.
Okay,
That would be appreciated.
thank
I
you.
did take notes as well, though.
I tried.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public that would like to speak to this item? Seeing none, would any members of the council like to respond to anything that they heard? Councilor Hamel?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite clear. There's a long list of substantive issues that have been raised here. There've been additional questions raised with the meaning and the effect, including possible unintended consequences from some of the things. So I know we like to work with some efficiency on the one hand. On the other hand, I think it really will behoove us to take the additional time necessary to get it right. And this is why we have public hearings, so we can make sure we get a chance to catch stuff we may have missed. So procedurally, my apologies from an ordinance committee standpoint, if we didn't capture these or understand them fully when we were going through the process to bring the ordinance to the council and to the public this far along.
And just so everybody knows, I did have a conversation with the town manager and Councilor Hamel earlier today, and I don't know if we'll be successful, but we're going to attempt to incorporate some of these things into an amendment package for second reading. If we are not successful, then I would support sending it back to ordinance for more work. So we'll see. This is why we have a public hearing, but reading through some of the minutes from the planning board, it was clear that there was probably some nuances that still needed to be addressed. So we're going to make a good faith effort to do that. If we can't, I'm certainly not going to try to rush it. Okay. With that, next is order number, I'll close the public hearing. Order number 22-042 is a 7 p.m. public hearing and schedule a second reading on the proposed new ordinance, chapter 1019, Town of Scarborough Manufactured Housing Community Licensing Ordinance. And this is just a follow-on from the previous topic. So I don't think we need any introduction. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing on that. And moving on to order number 22-043, a 7 p.m. public hearing and schedule the second reading to repeal chapter 500, the Town of Scarborough zoning ordinance relating to trailer and trailer camps. Again, this would repeal the currently existing ordinance, provided that we pass the others. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this one? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. And order number 22-056 is a 7 p.m. public hearing and schedule a second reading on the proposed amendment to chapter 405 zoning ordinance, section 6 definitions by adding workforce housing. And this actually originated from the council, was brought before the Housing Alliance, and I believe has gone to the planning board now. We're having a public hearing on it. Councilor Katarina and the town manager, I believe, were pretty intimately involved. Would you like to introduce it?
Do you want me to? Please. Yeah, this is something that you guys know I'm real hot and heavy on this one. And it's just a matter of putting into our ordinances an exact definition of what we mean when we say workforce housing. Because there is a difference in in HUD regulations between affordable housing and workforce housing. And this just basically it incorporates this into our ordinances. So we've got parameters to work with for income and whatnot.
Just to put perhaps a finer point on that, the workforce housing per this definition will kind of occupy that space of 80% to 100% of area median, 120% of area median income. Whereas affordable housing is 80% or less. Right. So it's really important to create those very clear distinctions in those income bands. I will say that there's further work that we perhaps should consider. The only place that workforce housing exists currently is in the growth management ordinance, and that's in a very specific context. Whereas affordable housing enjoys density bonuses and some other benefits elsewhere in town ordinances. So I think there's additional work to be done to really kind of start to maximize benefits, if you will.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this topic? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and move on to order number 22-057, a 7 p.m. public hearing, and schedule a second reading on the proposed zoning map amendment to change a portion of Highland Avenue from rural residential farming, RF, to residential, R2. And this originated at the request of a property owner. We have had a first reading. It was sent to the planning board for a public hearing, and now it's back to us for a public hearing at the council level. If there's any members of the public, or
Just
do you want to introduce this? Yeah.
Well, the long range planning committee spent a fair amount of time. They were directed to go through long range first. And so I think it's just important to say that that's where this started and proceeded through the process to this point.
It's been through quite a process so far, so. Okay.
Any members of the public that would like to speak to this item?
Nina McKee, 309 Black Point Road. As I understand it, the 17 acres are zone RF. And according to Jay Chance, in a March letter to the Long Range Planning Board, he wrote, quote, "The town is comprised of a number of established low-density residential neighborhoods, farms and rural residential areas, and natural protection areas. The town should continue to actively help preserve and maintain these properties where practical." Now, I know that in the zoning board, you're allowed to change zoning so that there's more uniformity in an area, and that whole area on Highland Avenue has been changed from really rural to really residential and pretty high density, in my opinion. Anyway, so I hope the council is aware that chipping away land into small lots, which means more people and less open space. So I hope so much that the council will agree to not make this zoning change for these 17 acres. And again, it's so wonderful to drive through there and see trees and not houses. So that's just my little thing. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public that would like to speak to this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any counselors like to respond to what they heard? Seeing none, we're going to move on to order number 22-064, 7 p.m. public hearing, and schedule a second reading on the proposed amendment to Chapter 311, Schedule of Fees, to change the reference of Chapter 500, Trailer and Trailer Camp, to Chapter 1019, the Town of Scarborough Manufactured Housing Community Licensing Ordinance. Well, this is, again, it came to us as a first reading at our last meeting. We're trying to tee it up at the same time as the other similar related orders. Tony or Tom, do you want to introduce what this is?
Yeah, this is simply changing the title. It's removing the Chapter 500 trailer and trailer camp reference in the fee order, if you will, fee ordinance, and replacing it with chapter 1019, which is what's being considered to replace that. So it's really just a administrative ministerial change.
Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this?
I think, I'm again, Teresa DeFosse, just like I was before, but Tom is right in that they're just changing the ordinance number, but also in the house car trailer camp ordinance, the license fee is capped at $110, and this changes that to $200. So we probably should cap it at $110. Thank you.
I believe the town clerk has some information regarding that
Actually,
matter, if
this-
it helps.
This was amended back in 2008, and this was never updated on the other ordinance, so she is. It's conflicting.
So the existing one, the trailer camp, chapter 500 says 110, and we have a separate
This is
that refers to that says 200.
correct.
So we have two numbers. This will make it one number, but we went with the higher number.
Now, let's go with the lower one.
Any other public comment on this topic? Any councilors like to respond? Okay, so we'll move on. Next is order number 22-065, a 7 PM public hearing and second reading on the new request for a marijuana establishment license for Shannon's Best Buds, doing business as Secret Stash Cannabis Company for an adult marijuana cultivation facility located at 10 Snow Canning Road, Unit 14. Liam?
Sure. So again, this is second reading, public hearing, second reading and approval of this license. This is an existing cultivation space at the Snow Canning Road facility. Has been inspected by staff, no concerns.
Okay. And we had a first reading on this at our last meeting. This was a public hearing. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Move on to order number 22-069.
I think
Whoa.
this contemplates second reading. as well.
Oh, second reading. Stop me. Okay. Do I have a motion, please, for order 22-065? The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And it's unanimous. And now moving on to order number 22-069, a 7 PM public hearing and action on the new request for a food handler's license and liquor license from Scott and Colleen Garland, doing businesses Shundi's Tuck, located at 623 US Route 1. Tony, would you like to introduce this?
As noted in the summary page, this is an existing establishment that was formerly known as Blast from the Past Diner. These are new owners, which is in new applications are required to come before the council for approval. Their application, both for the food handlers and the liquor licenses are in order, and we recommend approval.
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. And do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? And it's unanimous. Moving on to old business, order number 22-066, second reading to approve the expenditure in an amount not to exceed $210,000 from the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund for the purpose of purchasing property at 380 Payne Road, identified by the Scarborough Tax Assessor's Map R038/Lot 7, as recommended by the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and authorize the town manager to execute any and all documents as are necessary to protect the town's interest. This came to us at our last meeting from the Parks and Conservation Land Board. Tom, do you want to tee it up at all, or?
I guess I wanted to ask a clarifying question with Mr. Mackey here as well. When the project was introduced by Ms. Foley Ferguson last meeting, as I recall, she acknowledged that the appraisal was ordered but not yet in. And to that point, Mr. Mackey, I believe, said that they would not close unless and until the appraisal's at hand.
That is correct. Andrew Mackey, for the record, Executive Director of the Scarborough Land Trust, 7 Oak Hill Terrace, Scarborough. We expect, we're supposed to get the appraisal by June 24th. And at that time, we'll make sure that the appraisal matches our offer. If it doesn't, either we renegotiate to that lower price if the appraisal comes in lower, Or we have to pass on the project if we can't come to terms.
Thank you for that
So,
clarification.
yes.
So with this authorization, I will not provide the funds until that process is known and understood and to our liking, I'll say. So I just want to be clear, that's my intention with this authorization.
With that, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
I guess I should actually open it up to public comment. If there is anybody, any members of the public that would like to comment. Okay, seeing none, we have a motion and second. Is there any council discussion? Councilor Katarina.
Yeah, I'm very happy to see this. The more we can invest in land that we can preserve, particularly land in this area on Payne Road and near the Nonsuch River, I think as a council, we need to get behind. So I will be voting in favor of this.
Thank you. Councilor Andrews.
yeah, I will be as well. And just the fact that it's contiguous with other parts to continue to conserve a key area within Scarborough, I think is great to have this addition.
I agree. Yeah. So all those in favor? And it's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it to us. And good luck with the appraisal.
Yeah, yeah. Good luck.
Moving on to new business, order number 22-070, act on the request to certify the results of the school budget validation referendum election and the special municipal election that were held on Tuesday, June 14th, 2022. I'm sure you're tired by now.
Just a little. Okay, presented for certification to the town council are the results of the school budget referendum election, as well as the special town council election. Question one, the school budget validation referendum, there were 2,115 yeas, 915 noes, and 54 blanks. On question two, which was to continue for another 3 years for the budget, there were 2,143 yeas, 867 noes, and 74 blanks. And also presenting for certification by the town council is the results of the special town council election. Peter Freilinger received 1,182 votes. Nick McGee received 1,376 votes. Martin Topol received 273, and there were 245 blanks. We have approximately 19,151 active voters on our registration. It doesn't include anyone that we took in yesterday because we just, there were 3,084 voters who cast ballot in the school budget validation referendum, of which 1,191 were absentee ballots, which comprised of 38.6% of votes cast. Overall voter turnout was 16%. And I submit that for approval.
Thank you. Any members of the public who would like to comment on this? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Discussion? Councilor Katarina.
It's one of those people who stood out front good part of the day. It poked my head in from time to time, even though I didn't prevail in my primary. That's fine. You guys are stuck with me for a while, so there you go. Anyway, I want to thank Tody and the election workers. They just do a yeoman's job every single year. And I know that folks who came and were standing outside candidates from other towns and other areas were amazed. They're like, oh my God, because, you know, we do a really good job. I'm just not real happy that more people didn't come vote. So you know me, I'll tell you right now, I don't want to hear any complaining. If you didn't come out to vote, I don't want to hear about it. But anyway, there you go. That's it. Thanks.
Very good. Yeah, congratulations, Nick. Welcome. Just so you know that the next time we meet, we'll try to arrange a special meeting and that will be your induction into office. And then you'll have a seat up here. And thanks for sticking with us till the end as well. And thank you, Tody. I like the new setup. It was extremely efficient with the different lines for how you check in, and I like the new voting booths.
We had a lot of positive comments.
Good. With that, we're going to take a vote on the motion to certify the results of the election. All those in favor? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Order number 22-071, act to waive the competitive bidding requirements for purchase of 4 new hybrid police interceptor vehicles and authorize the town manager to execute the contract to effect the purchase. This was a late addition to our agenda. I had a conversation with the assistant town manager, who is our purchasing director, and Tom, I think on Monday, as an opportunity had presented itself, and we weren't meeting again until the end of July, so we opted to put this on our agenda. And that's all the introduction I'm going to give. So Tom or Liam, would you like to kind of?
So just to provide some background, so in the FY23 proposed budget, we try to replace 4 to 6 cruisers depending on the year as they cycle out, reach their kind of lifespan and their mileage that we have identified. We were contacted by one of the 2 vendors we really used when we go through a bid process to procure cruisers, notified us that they had some additional cruisers that were not yet spoken for. And it was kind of an email blast to area departments. It wasn't just to us saying, we have these vehicles available if anyone has interest. Based on that, that was something that came forward, my understanding is late last week. Our patrol division in coordination with our fleet maintenance manager evaluated kind of what they were offering those vehicles at, and it's extremely competitive rates compared to what we generally see. Just some more background on kind of the options. We have 1 hybrid vehicle in our current frontline fleet, which was we purchased, I think, 2 or 3 budget cycles ago to sort of understand what the efficiencies were there in terms of maintenance, upkeep, actual mileage. And even prior to gas prices spiking the way they have, our fleet maintenance manager really determined that after about 80,000 miles, we got the payback. That was when there was about a $4,500, $5,000 difference in the actual cost between a gasoline cruiser and a hybrid cruiser. Well, that, as you'll see in the detail provided, that gap now is far less than that, and gas prices are far more expensive. And so the payback, we think, will be closer to 60 or 65,000 miles. And these are vehicles that will run 100,000 miles as a frontline patrol vehicle, and will actually generally stay in the fleet for about 150,000 miles. So we'll get all of our money back and then some. We brought this forward because of the financial components to it. We've been told by our vendors, if we were to go out to a traditional bid process, likely we wouldn't see those vehicles for 12 months or so, and we could expect a 6 to 10% increase in the cost. And so this is an opportunity we're bringing forward to the council. Obviously, we don't like to recommend not going through a competitive bid process, but we think there's an opportunity here to put these vehicles on the road sooner, not have the delays, and save quite a lot of money in the meantime. I would point the council back to a decision we brought forward last fall, I believe, around a fire apparatus, where that vendor again contacted us, said, we know that there's another truck in the pipeline, which will be fairly similar to the one that we just completed for you. If you want to lock in some pricing, we're happy to provide you essentially a replica truck. And again, that required to a far higher dollar value, circumventing our bid process. The fire chief, and again, I think the town manager reported out recently, did circle back to us and notify us that saved us about $100,000 over what it would have been for cost escalators, additional engineering, just the cost of inflation, parts, and never mind supply chain disruptions. So we see this as an opportunity to move quickly, save the town some money, move in the direction of hybrid vehicles for our frontline patrol fleet, and we think it's a good option for your consideration.
Any questions for Liam?
Just as an aside, getting the patrol division to think about hybrid vehicles has been a bit of a challenge for obvious reasons. The technology has come a long way. So I think not so secretly, Liam, I see this as a way to really make a huge advancement, and they're fully on board. So there's kind of a side benefit to us as well to really start to move our fleet in this direction, which probably will be full electric at some point, I suspect.
I just have a question. So in the packet, you had alluded to the budget authorization this year. Would this have been in our CIP where we would have approved all four, or would this have been somewhere else in the
I
budget?
believe it's actually in our operating.
Okay.
This is
lines.
one of the
Yeah.
items that we've actually been able to transition over into operating. We do it
Okay.
year over year, so it really doesn't feel like it shouldn't be a capital item. We should
Okay.
budget for it, which we do. What we're requesting does fit within the authorized and approved budget.
The one thing I would note is that we've been informed by the vendor that they have at least 3 hybrids available. In the event they don't have a fourth, there's one that they've offered to another department they're on the fence about. If we can't obtain that fourth, then we will go through a competitive bid process for that fourth vehicle.
Seeing no other questions, are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this item? Very good. Seeing none, do I have a motion
So moved.
Second,
and discussion? Counselor Hamel.
No, a comment. Yeah, I generally don't like waiving competitive bidding processes, just, out of principle, but we've reviewed this. It seems like there's an opportunity for us to obtain the vehicles and to achieve savings that would be questionable in terms of if we waited, and who knows what's going to happen to the pricing. So we've done this before with good effect. So it's, for me, kind of like a kitchen table, common sense sort of decision, that if we were looking at doing the same thing, would you do this? And it does seem that there are good, solid reasons for it. And we do cycle these vehicles, into other uses, once they hit certain mileage figures. So, I think this has been analyzed and it seems like a reasonable and appropriate.
Yeah, we have a policy that mandates we go through a competitive bid process unless you get town council approval. So that's a pretty high standard, right? I'm sure Tom and Liam would not bring something to us if there wasn't good benefit and good reason. It would kind of be silly too. So I appreciate you trusting us and bringing this forward, and the council's support on short notice as well. Any other discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. We don't have any non-action items, so we'll move on to standing and special committee and liaison reports. Counselor Seiler.
On Monday night, joint Conservation Commission and Sustainability met to have a discussion. We tried to set expectations. Chairman Clucci joined me as council representation at the meeting. We tried to set expectations and maybe steer the committees away from specifically speaking to the exemption request that is in front of us from the Downs. That was not entirely successful because Mr. Bacon took the podium for public comment right away. And so, but that being said, I think that some of the members of the committee had some good questions and Dan was able to answer their questions. I think they had a good dialogue. And so I think, Rick Meinkin, who is the chair of sustainability, left with quite a bit of energy around some ideas that he hopes that the council will consider bringing to ordinance sooner rather than later, so that we can kind of make sure that our building codes and some of the standards that they would like to set for development are taken into consideration as we consider any future development, large development projects in Scarborough. So I thought that was a really productive meeting. What else do I have? Next Tuesday, the 21st, I believe, we have a finance committee meeting. It's our regular scheduled meeting. Clearly, the agenda has shifted less from table setting and more to talking specifically about the charter. And so expect an agenda for that to come out. And I would like to formally invite Nick McGee to join us if his calendar will allow. I think that you would help, give us some good perspective there. And I think that's all for my liaisons.
Counselors.
Yep. So the communications committee met yesterday. As a reminder, we have Counselor Corner Live tomorrow at 6:30 at the Public Safety Building, and the focus is on conservation and sustainability. I actually watched the joint meeting yesterday to try and learn a little bit more, and I took some good notes. Because that committee, they have some really good ideas. While it was about the downs, there were other things that were discussed that were just really interesting to follow. Also, just for awareness, one of the things we talked about in the committee to do that Allison is going to be working on is putting together a survey that we send out through I think our job form application, just to kind of pulse the community a little bit on communication preferences for engagement with the council. So she's taking a stab at putting something together that I'll share with the council before it goes out, just to make sure we're aligned. It's really about just knowing all of the different opportunities through which people can engage, whether it's through coming to a public meeting or going to the Council Corner Live or emailing us, like just trying to understand what's their preference and level of satisfaction so we can figure out how to think through other ways of better public engagement. The other thing, I had the opportunity last week to go to the district emergency management team meeting, which is an excellent collaboration between the town and the schools, where they partner to address emergency issues. And clearly with what happened recently in Texas, keeping our schools safe was a top priority in a conversation. And it was actually really hard as a parent to sit there, and I just have so much more respect for our public safety team, our schools, our IT department, and everything that they do to try and continue to keep our schools and our community safe. So after being there and hearing some of the ideas, safety is an issue that I think is always top of mind and will continue to improve. And so hopefully I can continue to attend those as the council liaison in partnership with the school board, just to continue to learn about the things we can do as a council, maybe to help facilitate and ensure that they're getting the support they need. When it comes to safety, there are certain things like costs that can come up in conversation that I don't think we want to be a barrier for asking if they need support. So, but again, I was totally impressed by the professionalism and the collaboration. And I think Jeff and Tom have done a great job, setting the tone to ensure that there's effective collaboration between the school and the town. So I was really pleased to see that and participate in that.
Excellent.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Councilor Anderson, I think you actually walked into my office following that meeting, as I recall, and you did raise the issue. Just wanted to make sure that the council was hearing there were not barriers for conversation around what improvements might be necessary. I did have the occasion to speak to a number of key staff, including the superintendent, IT director, and public safety officials, just really encouraging them, don't be shy about coming forward. The worst we can say is no. We really need to know what those needs are. So I think that message was well received, and we'll see if anything does come forward.
Councilor Hamel.
Yeah, I have two updates. Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee met last evening. We're updating the ordinance on the waterfront with the help of Darren Granada, who's really quite knowledgeable on that topic. He's shown a lot of ownership and it's making major contributions driving that process. So it includes, interesting things as rules on moorings as well as houseboat definitions. So, I mean, I don't know if that's going to fall within an accessory dwelling unit or not, but there's certain, right. So Coastal Waters and Harbor there, at the next meeting, we are going to talk about trying to gather information on potential repairs, maintenance fees, and other, current status of our budget and funding sources. And I know we did an update on this several years ago, but we're going to try to get an idea of what sort of improvements are going to be required for the pier, including the crane. And then we'll be having an ordinance committee meeting tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and we'll be talking about a couple of issues. I don't think we'll be ready to talk about all of the issues that were raised this evening in terms of the manufactured homes, however. But we will be talking about solar arrays. The Sustainability Committee is coming back with some recommendations on potential revisions for solar arrays. There were some difficulties with the requirements that were pretty onerous in terms of clearing land. So there's some plans for how to do that, but also to provide for reforestation and other vegetation plans. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any, oh, okay, counselor comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And all those in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Have a great night.